Hi there, Colin Storm here with Keller Williams Realty at Falls Church, and we're back from the holidays with the next 1 Minute Monday. And today I'm going to dive into yet another detail from the Zillow Consumer Trends Report that I mentioned in previous posts. And this one is to do with the frequency with which buyers will not use an agent to purchase their home. Of the people surveyed, of the homeowners surveyed for this report, evidently about 25% of those folks didn't use an agent to purchase the property that they're in. And while I understand the circumstances that often surround that, I do want to address one major misnomer with many of those purchases. And I do this often with folks, and it usually comes up in regard to new construction, most commonly, but then also just resale, where people, it's in the mind that you're going to get a better deal, essentially, if you don't use an agent, that you can then leverage that fact to get a better price on the property. Now that can be true in some cases, but when you're talking about new construction or just a general listing that's on the market where you're going to approach that agent directly for the seller, there's already a commission, a buyer side commission built into those transactions. New construction builders build that into their expenses, so they're already assuming that they're going to pay a buyer's agent 2.5%, 3%, whatever it is, but there's some assumption there. So when you go into those situations, or again, working with an agent directly who's representing the seller, hoping to kind of use that as leverage, the fact that you don't have an agent as leverage to get a better price, that's the expense there is usually already built in. So if you go to an agent directly on a listing, what happens is then they get the whole percentage. So if they've agreed with the seller to sell the home for 5% or 6%, what they usually are agreeing to is that they will then share half of that, generally, with a buyer's agent. And now if there is no buyer's agent, they just collect the entirety themselves. So, and I understand I'm probably going to go over a minute here, but I think it's worth it. So in those circumstances, you're probably not getting a better deal. With the new home builder, certainly not. But when you're approaching a listing agent directly, if you want to get a better deal there, then you have to actively leverage that. You have to actively negotiate with them, and this is on your own because you don't have an agent that you're using, to cut their commission. You need to get their broker to agree to cut their commission in half and then try to get that difference into the sales price, so reduce the sales price by that much. That's where you can maybe leverage a deal, but you've got to actively go about that, and that can be a bit of a challenge to do because that listing agent is still going to have to do work on your behalf, even if they're not representing you. They're still going to have to do work for your side of the transaction, so they tend to still want to be paid a portion for that if they're going to do that work. Anyhow, so I wanted to address, because 25% is a high number, there are not 25% of buyers leveraging a deal by not having an agent. So for the vast majority of people, it's going to make sense just, for the sake of, backup and an extra set of eyes on a contract, like with a builder contract or whatever. They're already assuming that expense, so you might as well have someone come in to be on your side to kind of poke holes in whatever contract is there and make sure you're being fairly treated. Especially in our market here in the Falls Church, Arlington area, where you're talking about one of builders. They're not building a community, they're building a house on a lot, and you're working directly with that builder. So there's not kind of this safety in numbers from a buyer perspective. It's helpful to have an agent on your team navigating that process with you. Again, as I already mentioned, there are legitimate opportunities to not have an agent. So if you are renting a house and you find out the person 3 doors down is thinking about selling, willing to sell, and you can approach them and offer them just a off-market deal where they're not paying a listing agent commission or a buyer agent commission, then you really can end up working out a deal, so long as you agree on an appropriate market value. Because that's the other risk, is if you don't have agents involved, it's potential that you could agree for something that's too high to begin with. And so, when you're paying $1 million for a property that's worth $900,000, that's not a deal in the end for for the seller it is, but certainly not for you. So there's things to be cautious about in that. And again, I don't want to just throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are ways to get deals by not using a buyer's agent. You just need to be careful about it. And it's certainly not 25% of all transactions where that deal is possible. The vast majority of those, you might as well have an agent in your corner because, again, those expenses are factored in to begin with. So anyway, that is my 2, 3, 4, 5 cents for this 1 Minute Monday. Probably more like a 5-minute Monday. If you have any questions about that, let me know. It is something that I commonly address. And one thing, and I'll talk about this in the post, if you know that there's a possible property that you could do a direct deal on, and so you're hesitant to get an agent, but you still want to shop around for other properties, go ahead and sit down with an agent and try to work out with them to isolate that property. Say, I do want to work with you to search for a home. However, if an opportunity arises for 123 Main Street, because I know that person, we're thinking about working on a deal, carve that out of the buyer agency agreement and try to get the broker to agree to that is an option that you have there so that you're not limited and you can continue a search with representation for all other properties out there in the market. Anyway, now it's up to 10 cents, I think, for this week. Anyway, Colin Storm here, Keller Williams Realty at Falls Church, and that is the 1, 2, 3, 10, 15-minute Monday. Thank you so much. See you next week.